Director of Marianne Liebert Inc. Publishers and the lead of the New Directions seminar. And we are so pleased this morning to welcome the next panel titled New Tools in Visibility and Findability of Research, organized by committee member John Shaw. And just so we have plenty of time for the discussion, I will hand things over to John.
And of course get right into our topics, which is discovery, new tools, technologies, and kind of everything we can think of in between, and then anything you can think of with some questions that we'll have after. So I'm really pleased to have this distinguished panel, really wonderful individuals here, and let's start hearing a little about them. But first, this is who we have. We have Sean. Look at that, just in time. We have Steph Garrett. Clap. I told you, this is a just-in-time panel, and Steph is just in time. So I gave you a good picture, Steph. What do you think about your picture? You like that one? Yeah, that's what she was doing right before this morning. Actually, Steph, I think, just got off the airplane from Chicago. So, by the way, happy birthday, Alex. Everybody, clap. We thought this would be the best way to spend his birthday, so why not do this today? We're going to ask him extra questions for that. And then, of course, we have Neil Christensen with us. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is hand it over to the group. We're going to do a panel discussion today, so I'm going to give the panel 3 minutes each to discuss themselves and their companies. After the first 15 minutes, we're going to go into some questions and answers that we've prepared, and then we're going to open it back up to the group. We may have a little bit more than 5 minutes, so we'll see how things get going. So without further ado, let's hand off. I'm going to hand microphones around, so please forgive us.
Oh, y'all hear me? Okay. So my name is Sean Reif. I'm the Director of Research for company Site. I'm also an assistant professor of psychology at Murray State University in Kentucky. So I wear a couple of different hats. I'm kind of a busy guy. But just to give you an overview about our company and what we do, we're a little over a year old, so we're kind of new. We started last year with some venture capital and have recently been awarded a couple of grants from the NSF and NIH. So we're very excited about that. And we're based in Brooklyn, but we have team members all over the world. So let's get right to it. What problem do we solve, or do we hope to solve? We are in an age when information is plentiful. Every year there is, I think, between 1.8 and 2.5 million scientific papers published. And, within subfields that can be a few thousand or even tens of thousands, depending on what field you're working in. So there's an abundance of information, but at the same time we're in a period where trust in that information in science is, I think, lacking. How many of you are familiar with the term replication crisis? Okay, there we go. So this is just the fact that a lot of what were once considered well-established findings in a number of different fields, including my own of social psychology, are now being questioned because they're failing to replicate. So you have this sort of dual situation where there's a lot of information, but it's difficult to discern what is trustworthy and what is not trustworthy. So we at Site are trying to address that through citation analysis. So if you go to our website at site.ai, you can input a DOI. If you say have a paper by Fan et al. Here and are interested in this topic, maybe it's something that's not your area of specialization, but it's something you need to understand. You can insert the DOI, pull up a report on this paper, and what our platform does is it will give you a list of other papers that cite that paper. We do a couple of additional things. We actually have a machine learning program that goes in there and actually extracts the text of the citation itself. So you can see on the slide, you can see the actual text of what the people are saying. And then we do one additional thing, which is over here, we actually have a deep learning classifier that analyzes the text itself and classifies it as either supporting, contradicting, or simply mentioning a given paper. So it'll give you some sense, if one paper is saying, well, we replicated the findings of Fan et al., then that will be listed as supporting, and if they say we failed to replicate the findings of Fan et al., then they'll be classified as contradicting, or if they're just talking about it sort of in the abstract, then it'll be just a mentioning citation. So with this, we really hope to help people separate the wheat from the chaff of scholarly research. And just in my work as a professor, I use it every hour, maybe, every day. I use it all the time. It's a constant part of my workflow, so it's definitely useful to me.
Yes, okay, great. Hi, everyone. As described, I'm Stephanie Garrett from PartDB. Also, of many other things that maybe you've heard of, like Sage, Alexander Street Press, Sage Video, archival collections, whatever you might have heard of me around, that's what I do. However, my background right now and what I'm focused on is my own and our own publishing company, which is in podcasting. Let's see if I know how to work this. So, PartDB, we formed in 2017, and we're an information publisher for podcasting data. And so what we provide is essentially who appears in podcasts, who created them, what the podcast was about, and we're essentially pulling together a database about everyone who appears in the podcast, and actually what's being discussed and who's being mentioned in them, and classifying, discerning them in that way. The database has about 1 million episodes, 15,000 shows, 80,000 people. That's not very many to us right now, because in the world of podcasting, there are about 761,000 active shows. So given that, there is a lot of room to grow this database and data set over time. But the reason that we started to do it, and and some of the things that we do in our companies that we do data deliveries, so there's data compliance services that we provide. So say a company actually wants to understand and use the data of the people who are in the podcast, well, you have to get data privacy clearances for that and make sure it's compliant with those rules. We help in servicing companies to ease that. And also, we do data research and prototypes based off of this growing data set that our publishing company is building. Why we're doing it is because there are huge problems within podcasting, even though it is super exciting as a medium and industry. I think I'm among a tribe of people that probably understand podcasts are important or interesting, but for anyone who doesn't, they're important and interesting. There are a lot of them. And right now, like I said, there's 761,000 active shows, but there's going to be huge growth. For instance, there are 14 million new weekly listeners in America in 2019 than there were in 2018. Just 14 million more. So those growth numbers of listenership are really going to keep going. And we need to help companies who are already in this space. So you're a marketing team, you're a particular podcast network who's looking for talent, or you have a product team where you want to do a whole list of features and services around podcasts that are quite interesting to you, potentially in the academic space or any space that you're working in. You need good data to do that, and so that's the thing that we're helping companies have, is good compliant data around podcasts, because there's a budding industry around it. Just really quickly, showing you what that actually means in some highlights. Not too many words, because John said don't talk too much, but I do talk too much, so he knew that. Some of the things of why it's important, the disambiguation of someone like Jon Favreau. I love both of them. One worked with Beyonce on The Lion King, the other one tells me what to think in the political media. I need both of them in my lives. They both do podcasts. How do you distinguish between them? And that is basically more examples of that in visualizations. But as a company, we have a data set, we're presenting it to people, and we keep growing it for the growth of the market, and also because I think this medium type is hugely valuable to the educational market, which hopefully that'll come up in today's discussion. Passing it off to... Oh, cool. Here you go.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Alex Wade, and it is my birthday today. So, for people who are not aware, CCI Science is one of the arms of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. We are, I think, somewhat unusual in the philanthropic space in that we are mission-driven around curing, managing all human disease and suffering by the end of the century, funding basic scientific research to do that. But as well, we also have a very large technology arm within CCI. We want to get our hands dirty, we want to learn, we want to gather data that helps us inform our decisions. And so we are in the business of funding science and in the business of building tools to advance science. So a couple of the examples that came up yesterday in discussions, some of the areas that we are funding are things like ASAP Bio, BioArchive, Protocols.io, great partners to work with. But one of the things that I'll tell you briefly about is a tool that we are, Chan Zuckerberg actually acquired, a startup called Meta, formerly called Sciencescape. We're about to launch this actually real soon now, like maybe in the next week or so. Don't tweet that. If you go to the website right now, you can actually sign up, you get put on a wait list, but if you wait a week, that might be gone. So let me tell you just very briefly about the problem that we're trying to solve with Meta is really sort of basically just a current awareness problem. The tools that people are using today to stay up to date on research are alerts with Google Scholar, saved queries within PubMed. All of our space right now is within the biomedical field. But there's a problem with obviously the increased volume of content that gets created here. So we have an indexing, real-time indexing problem that we're trying to solve. We have a ranking problem that we're trying to solve. And like Steph mentioned, there's also all the issues of author disambiguity, entity linking to concepts within the content of the documents. So I just said all of that. Just to give you a sense, when you log in, we have a number of channels or feeds of information that are pre-generated for users to pick from, or you can spin your own. There's a number of different areas that we're using machine learning to track certain aspects of the publications. Are we seeing large increases in the volume of content within one of these channels or within specific concepts, for example, that we might want to highlight so we can identify trends before humans might identify them. And you can drill down into a taxonomy of these feeds. So just to pick something like cardiovascular physiology, we have 134 pre-created feeds that users can select from. Once they do that, they are able to sort of modify these and fine-tune them and personalize them over time. But the overall experience then is really fairly Slack-like, if anybody is a Slack user here, in that you have a set of channels that you have either created or subscribed to, and then you have content down the middle column. The general idea here is that we're trying to put the most relevant, most important recent publications into your feed on a daily basis, with some other recommendations and other features that go along with that. So that's Meta. Look forward to the chat.
Let's hand it over to Neil.
Advance through my other slide here. More screenshots.
This way. Hi, I'm Neil. I'm the sales director at Onsilo. Onsilo is a text analytics company. Some would call it an AI company. But what we really do is a lot of natural language processing and machine learning in combination. And we work with a number of publishers and information service providers. You could roughly divide what we do into maybe 4 categories. Evaluate, which is about manuscript screening. I'll show you some examples in a sec. Classify, which is about helping package content, very similar to what Alex was talking about. And then recommend, with a special D, that's around related discovery. Recommenders, and then we also do some custom solutions. And let me show you what some of this stuff is. So here's an example of Evaluate and the Reviewer Finder solution. It runs as an API. A manuscript comes into a manuscript tracking system. We pick up the manuscript, we analyze who would be the most appropriate reviewer based on their previous publication history. So there's no need to select keywords. There's no need to keep reviewer profile tags up to date. We take care of that. We also automatically filter out people that have authoring conflicts or institutional affiliation conflicts, right? People have authored together or been at the same institution the past 3 years. There are a number of things that we do, and we can talk more about that later, just as an example. Here, technical checks. Manuscript comes in. There are a number of things that editorial offices check for. So in this example, right, we find funding statements, conflicts of interest, ethical statements, data access statements. There's a long list, and this is just sort of an example of some of the things that we can spot. And this can sort of help editorial offices, reduce the amount of time they spend on checking, or being able to validate that a manuscript contains or does not contain certain things faster. Here's now we're going to classify. So this is more in the content packaging area. So this is an example from OECD where they wanted to classify all their content, like 250,000 articles, according to the 17 United Nations Sustainability Goals. So we provided them with Classify as a tool to help do that. So basically, you pick some articles that you feel are representative, and then the software helps you identify all the outliers, and you basically, you combine the human intelligence for understanding what it is you want in a collection, and then you combine it with the machine intelligence for being able to spot trends across a lot of data. And of course here that then means that they put a front end on it where you're able to go in and say, well, I want to see all my content that has to do with water and sanitation and zero hunger. You can run different combinations across the different collections. Here, recommender. There are many recommenders out there, but what we do, what we sort of pride ourselves on, is our ability to provide good recommendations. There are some recommenders that just run off like titles and brief descriptions, and that may be fine in some domains, but if you publish content, say, in social sciences or humanities, that's not always easy to provide good recommendations on. So we analyze the full text, fingerprint that, and then we provide recommendations that are pretty good. Here's a custom project, Nano. We built a custom classifier that's able to detect whether a piece of content is about nanotechnology or not. So on a weekly basis, we have a feed coming in from plus 20 publishers, and it runs through the software, and it indexes those articles that are about nanotechnology and disregards the others. And then there's a number of things that we're able to do as a service because we've analyzed the full text. And then the final one here is just more like an example of just, metadata generation. So the keywords you see there at the bottom, they're not author-provided keywords. Those are keywords that our software has extracted from the text. So one benefit of this is, of course, these are not words that we came up with. These are words that the authors have used, and they're words that other authors who write similar papers tend to use. If you were to come back and look at this article in 10 years from now, those keywords may have changed. With traditional keywords, right, you would go back and you look at a paper from the 1950s and you'd be horrified to see some of the keywords that people have selected. So this is a way of sort of updating keywords for content in a dynamic fashion over time. And that's it for my examples.
Thank you. Oh. I think that's, I'll take it. Yeah. We're going to keep doing mic pass around, so it's like a dance with the microphone. So for the next 30 minutes, we're going to do some questions and answers. I think if you're interested in what you just saw from panelists, then please speak with them after. But that's the end of our discussion on the exact tools that they've created. So what we're going to get into, though, are some generic questions around technology. And so you saw what their products and companies are doing, but what we wanted to do is explore a little bit more about how they're using technology, what technologies they're using, and kind of the hype cycles of technologies and whether it's important or not. I think you probably saw some similarities between all their companies, and that's by design. They're all at different spectrums of kind of our industry or the research industry, all trying to provide different tools to solve different problems, all the way from the researcher all the way up to, of course, publishing and solving world problems. So with that, let's jump into a couple of questions. I'm going to just randomly ask the group. They don't know what's coming their way. They have no idea. No, I'm kidding. They have kind of an idea, but they don't trust me either. So, Steph, I'm going to ask the first question of you because because you came in last. All right, you see how we work. All right. So, what technologies or new technologies are you using to help solve the problems that you're looking to solve, or to build your technology? Oh, I have to hand that over.
Sorry. Yeah. So I guess it's good to start with that's lovely. Real-time problem solving, excuse me. To answer the question, the technologies we use, we program in a language called Elixir, and that's the programming language we use. For this crowd, it's kind of like Ruby on Rails, if you've ever heard of it, but if you haven't, that's fine. We use things like Elasticsearch. So our idea around using technology is really about building an internal publishing system. And so we use things that are off the shelf as quickly as possible, because frankly, what we're focused on with our technology, I guess, solutions are, can we get them off the shelf relatively free, or are they open source that we can donate something to them? Can we spin this up with the one developer, who is my co-founder, Nazar, who's doing all of the engineering work for the publishing system? Can he spin this up himself? So can it be cheap, free, one person can do it, and can it expand to support a lot of people hitting it? So we have a lot of human curation. We have a lot of automated technologies coming into our internal platform and systems in order to produce a data set for podcasting that's meaningful. So all of our technology solutions, like Elixir, like Heroku, like AWS, it doesn't give us vendor lock-in necessarily, but we also need to go with off-the-shelf solutions relatively quickly and expediently. And ultimately, that's because what we're delivering or what we're giving to customers is very low tech, in that it's a high grade of information that they've never had available for them to use in their services or to do with their targeted programming.
Neil, do you want to take the same question but with a slant on it? So when you've chosen to use your technology, so this is the second part of it, how do you decide whether you're going to use the newest technology out there or use something that's trusted and proven? So that's the second side of your question.
I think we change our mind all the time, to be honest, right? There are always like new things coming out, right? There's always someone in a team who spots an opportunity to do something in a better way, a more efficient way, in a cheaper way, and in a way that allows us to tweak the offering in a way that allows us to make a competitive offer to one of our customers. It's always changing, and sometimes it's also admitting that we don't need to over-engineer everything. I mean, down. Okay, there are some things that we do that can be sort of fairly rules-based, right? They don't have to have sophisticated machine learning behind them, and then maybe we blend it with some machine learning. I mean, I have an example. I showed the example there with the technical checks. There's some of the technical checks that can run off what we sort of call regex or word string matching, right? So we have some fairly elaborate scripts of what are the words, the word combinations we're looking for to detect a signal for a particular check. But then there's some of the checks that absolutely cannot, right? And need very complex machine learning and language models to be able to function. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single check that we run needs a complex model. So we're always like changing it. And then finally, I'd say, of course, there are new language models that are coming out on an annual basis. And some of them look very exciting, but are too expensive to run for maybe a particular product category that we have. Well, we could do it, but then it would make it expensive, and then no one would buy it. And then there are other times where, like that. Oh, sorry. And then there are other times where we can justify doing something complex and expensive. So I don't know if that really is. It isn't like a definitive answer. There's just constant evolution of these things.
I think that sounds right. Yeah. John, I think I have a great question for you, because you're another startup company, so been around for a couple of years. How did you choose of whether or not you were going to use open source technology or open source platforms that were available versus something off the shelf?
I mean, I think that for us as a company, we're sort of embedded in a culture of using open source products as much as possible. We're a Linux shop, we're a Python shop, and these are all big, contributors to open source or the impetus for open source in some cases. So part of that is just a cultural thing and where we all come from and what the background of the individual team members are. But I think the other part of it that really plays a role for us is that a number of the tools that we really definitely needed, a number of the, and part of our ingestion pipeline and actually pulling in documents and extracting the relevant information, a number of perfectly oriented tools for that task were already available as open source projects. And in fact, we brought on the director of one of those projects, Patrice Lopez, who's been working with us and developing those products, a number of different products that he works on that are open source projects. And then contributing back to those projects in the work that we've done. So it's gratifying in the sense that we're able to make a contribution back to those projects as part of our own work. It might be different if there were, a set of tools that were closed source, that were perfectly oriented toward what we were doing. We might have made a different decision. But I think in our case, we just lucked out in that the things that we need to use really fit well with the culture of our company. So.
Great, thank you. I've heard that we have a microphone malfunction. So we're going to use the microphone in my hand. We can hear you, but I think the people online probably can't. So we're going to move using this one microphone again because it's more fun this way. So Alex, you have 3 different sub-questions you could answer from this question. I'm going to give you the opportunity to answer whichever question you wanted to in that set.
So I'll echo what Josh said a little bit. I mean, I think for us, there's a sort of a philosophical compatibility with open source. If you sort of look at our entire stack, there are some things that are commodity for us and some things that are effectively off the shelf. They happen to be open source platforms. We're not necessarily using them because they're open source platforms, and we're not necessarily using them because they're free. But we use, for example, Cassandra and Solr to drive a lot of our front-end experiences. We have yet to find any case where we have a need that isn't met by that product that we would feed back into the open source community, but we could certainly do that. At the top of the waterfall, if you will, is where it gets into the more sort of experimental phase, where we're doing more core computer science work around some of the things that Steph was mentioning, like author disambiguation. That's not a solved problem. Entity linking is not a solved problem. There are great libraries out there, but in many cases, it's not necessarily the software that's doing it. It actually is more around the data that you're using to train the model that you're using. So that's an area where we do get a little bit more into the weeds of it and could actually be making contributions back to these projects. And in a lot of cases, what we're doing is using multiple algorithms in sort of an ensemble approach and sort of taking the net out of all of these. So yeah, I mean, it's philosophy and it's pragmatism more than anything else.
Great. Okay, let's move on. I have a question for this group here. So we, before the question is, we heard a lot with each of the companies that it looks to be that they're using machine learning and abstract indexing. This is our joke last night. See it caught in my brain. We're using abstract indexing in all of our solutions. So AI and machine learning is being used across each one of these companies. So within this room, how many of you are actually using some sort or form of machine learning or AI in your operations? All right, that's helpful. Maybe probably less than a quarter of everyone here. How many of you still are perplexed on whether you should be using it or what even the heck it is? It's okay to answer. I'll say, once in a while I'll say that. How many of you know or think that it's overhyped right now or still trying to figure out whether there's a practical use for it within your organization? All right, that's just helpful. So we're going to focus a little bit on that and just hear kind of how each one of our panelists are using it within their companies, and hopefully that will give you a bit more there to take and kind of think about how you may use it within your organization as well. So as I noted, each one of you seem to be using it in some form within your organizations to solve the individual problems that you have or that you saw. So how important is it for you or your companies to use and embrace AI and ML? yeah, we'll just leave it at that portion of the question. Who wants to take this one? We'll leave it as a first come, first serve here. All right.
I'll get it started. I don't know if that's... I mean, for...
has to because it's in his URL.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is actually, I mean, for us, it really just defined our ability to address this problem. I mean, we wouldn't have started our company if the tools of machine learning and deep learning were not available to us. Nobody would have said to themselves, you know what we should do is we should develop a way of classifying citations. You can't do that manually. The AI is what makes it possible. So it has, for us, it has changed the kinds of questions that we ask. It's changed the kinds of problems that we address. Now, I don't think that's the case for everyone. You should always use the solution that is as simple as possible. Like Einstein said, it should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So you should never use an advanced solution like that just because it's out there. But for us, it's what made our company possible. I don't think that's an overstatement.
So that's really, really helpful, because I would describe it that we actually used it at a point where we needed to decide how we were going to use budget. So there was a moment of how do we scale up in order to support more content that we want to process and more information. And I had a group of staff that were sitting and available and able to put through a lot of information and curate it properly. But there became a crossroads of, are we going to hire 20, 30 more people? Or how can we make this group that we have right now more efficient, more effective? And so that's when we started looking into IBM Watson natural language processing and seeing what information, what pronouns, what formal names can we actually extract from the episode information? How can we auto-transcribe using machine learning and basically the lowest level, cheapest off-the-shelf machine learning or AI tools to make the current group and current staff more, in the publishing system, more efficient than it was before. And that really struck me that your business needed to form because of AI. It was a real crossroads moment where I was very much like, no technology is really going to take us over the hump because this is hard work that only really the primary audio and human beings have to do it. And I, over time, learned that actually there was a huge benefit for me thinking about how to improve the staff and the efficiency of the current group that we have using AI machine learning. And that was a huge shift for me in my head about what was the right group, what was the right staffing levels, because we had a far more efficient group after we implemented AI. And what someone can see the formal names of, President Obama, I guess, former President Obama. They have, you can see that in the episode description. However, is he the discussion of the episode, which usually he is? He's usually a topic of discussion. He's only been in maybe 5 to 10 episodes as an actual guest. Being able for the staff to easily recognize whether there was a guest or whether President Obama was actually just spoken about was a huge game changer for us in like the first year or two of actually building it. So that was the way that we used it and implemented it. It's been working and evolving through that. Sorry.
I just want to add on to something. It's also oftentimes I found not just a matter of should I be using machine learning to solve this problem, but what's the sort of tolerance, what's the quality, for example, what it's going to produce, and what's the tolerance for that quality? So, in the example that you're giving, sounds like you probably have humans in the loop, and what you're using the output of is something that somebody else is going to review. If you're looking at systems like speech to text, for example, this was a problem that the computer science community was trying to solve for well over a decade, and it wasn't until somebody started bringing in deep neural networks into that particular space that you had this pivotal point of going from basically a 85% accuracy rate to a 95% accuracy rate, and immediately on top of that you started seeing things like Siri emerging into the consumer market. So how good does something like speech to text need to be in order for it to solve your problems? And the corollary to that is, how are you evaluating how good these systems are? So in many cases in entity recognition, we are evaluating how well the algorithm does based on how well humans do. And humans aren't perfect. So if humans are good 90% of the time, and you can get 90% of that 90%, then you're going to have a degradation of what humans can do. But if you can do it 1,000 times faster, that might be worthwhile. So it's not a Boolean decision of do I use the technology or not use the technology, but what is my investment going to be in actually creating accurate training sets and evaluation sets, and what's my tolerance for pain downstream?
I want to give you a variation of the question. If you can answer that one as well, I'm going to give you a variation on. So, everyone's thinking right now, okay, I've heard about how they're using it and what they're using it with. But what we're not getting at as well is how do you decide whether you buy a solution that's available on the market, whether you build it from scratch, whether you use one of the open source frameworks that are available. So, in addition to how you're going to answer, how do you decide what to use?
Yeah. Okay. I think, well, first of all, I think all of us have touched on this, right? You don't want to invest in AI to invest in AI. You want to use AI or machine learning, natural language processing, to the extent that it solves a problem for you, right? And that's it. And if it doesn't, then don't. I think when I look at, so I've been with OnSilo for 2 years, but I knew the founders from, fairly early on after they started. And they've admitted it too. It was clear that when they started, and it was called OnSilo, right? They were looking to see to which extent they could help find information in verticals and unsilo it and make discovery possible in other domains. There's a beetle that does something, a special mechanism. Could that maybe inspire someone who has an engineering problem in another domain? Things like that. When they started, it was very much technology chasing a use case. It totally was, right? They weren't solving they had a dream of that something like that could be a real problem, but that wasn't really a problem that they could make money on. And you could see sort of the 4 solution clusters that I had there. What started happening was that the company started, moving sort of upstream, and every time it jumped upstream, it thought about problems in a more specific way, and many of those problems weren't like problems where we just give it to the machine will figure it out, right? And many of those problems were, you mentioned something a bit about, you go 90% or 80% or something like that. In the cases where it's relevant, can the software, take you, 75% of the way, give those options to a person, and then let the person, take the final, 25%, or maybe they only go like 15%, but 90% is enough. And it's those type of solutions that we're sort of increasingly building, not full automation, but more like sort of augmenting, supporting people with what they do best, using machines and what they do best, right? The software is really good at going through a lot of data and putting sort of trends or analysis or patterns from that data in front of a person. But there are many other things that you would want to use this type of technology for, where you ultimately still want a person to make a decision about how to use sort of that temporary result. Classify, picking reviewers, help me scroll through technical checks. It's not like fully automated. It's this combination of human and machine that I think is interesting. I think that answered one question, but I don't know if it answered the second question, which was?
I think you actually answered the second one, which was whether you buy off the shelf or you use open source.
So there you just got to ask yourself, what is it you want to do? It could be that you have a fairly small problem that's fairly easy to define, and maybe you want to hack something together yourselves, right? And you do have the folks in your team who can do that. There are some advantages to that. There could be some problems or opportunities that are just at a slightly different scale, and you don't want to get into trying to build it yourself. You don't want to spend 12 to 24 months of putting it together. You don't want to, accumulate all this technical debt and sunk costs in putting something together. I work with publishers. I come from a publishing background myself, and I've seen many internal projects take forever. And once they get started, they're very difficult to change or influence, because you're not just buying a service. It's an internal team that's delivering it to you, and there are all sorts of sensitivities and political issues for why you can't necessarily influence the development of a software in a certain direction. Some of those things become much easier when you work with an external party. And you get the benefit of having access to teams and people that do nothing else but this, that are always on the lookout for optimization, new language models, getting better at name entity recognition, disambiguation, concept collapsing. There's a ton of stuff, right? And on Silo, we're a fairly small team. We're 30 people, 8 software engineers, 3 machine learning people, 2 NLP and computational linguistics people, and actually, quite importantly, 2 user experience and UI designers. Because when you do these things, you really have to understand how people are going to be using the solution that you have. Now, if you want to build that out, or if you have that experience, or you don't need that sort of full complement of people, then absolutely go ahead. But if you don't, then just be careful, right? It's very difficult to change course once you've gotten yourself into playing around with some of these things. Yeah.
So Neil,
Yeah?
I'll switch the subject slightly, because you hit on something else that I think is interesting. So talking about your UI and UX designers and kind of how your customers or your internal customers want to see something gets into one of our other questions. So we're going to switch around from kind of technology to another issue that we thought was interesting, which was kind of the classification versus clarification, and how do your customers want to see things organized? So how will we solve that problem of understanding how people want to see the mass amounts of information that's available to us today? Stephanie, I'm going to hand that one to you first, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind. That's great. So I have quite a bit of experience with this through active failure. So when you have a data set of podcasts and you're asking people, how would you like to consume that? They say, oh, no one's ever given me that. And I say, no, I know, that's why I'm here. And they say, okay, we need to think about that. Maybe it's an API. Can you give us an API? Let's do an API. Then they realize that actually they don't want to consume an API, so there was no real reason to build a database and put it into an API, because they don't have the technology staff to make calls and requests to an API. They don't know. Then it was, well, let's have it in an interface in some way so that people can browse and search. Well, in that instance, that's great, but usually when someone's wanting to browse and search, that's when it gets into a classification of, I want to see it by genre, but potentially by academic discipline, but also by people who might be related to these other people who are in podcasting, and also people discussed versus the people who are actually creating it. Those are just 3 or 4 clarifications versus categorizations that they want to see on the UI. So that's like one area. And then there's the one that actually worked, which was spreadsheets. So sadly, the thing that actually worked and the thing that became the first product was, hey, do you have like CSV files of just the people, the shows, the episodes, and like maybe their social media handles? Can you just give me that? That actually sold. That was the thing. That was, we give you 12 spreadsheets. You come get it off of a Dropbox, pay lots of money for that. Maybe we'll give you another update batch of that. That's the greatest user interface is a spreadsheet and a Dropbox. And am sick to my stomach that that is the case. I fought it for 2 years as the driver of this company, and I am now in a space that I just accept that that is the workflow and the user interface that the current market, and that's going to change. Podcasting is going to grow. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be different. We all know and see that coming. Well, those that are careers on it, we see that coming. But I think where the industry is now, you have to meet your customers where they are now with their user interface. And we found out spreadsheets is where they are.
Add on to that real quick too. This is great. This is great. No, and I think that actually that has some similarity with one of our experiences. So back when we were in the early days of just developing, we have an API and we don't have spreadsheets. So yet we might.
You'll get there.
We might. I mean, that's maybe the new thing. You never know. A CSV file, imagine. But no, it's really interesting because one of the things that we had toyed around and just talked about was, well, do we want a browser plugin? So a thing that will, pop up when you go to a journal, an article's, web presence that will just say, here's the number of, confirming, refuting, mentioning citations for this article. And you can click on it, pull up the full report. And I and our CTO were kind of like, browser plugin? I don't need a browser plugin. A browser plugin is just it's a pain in the butt to put together, and I don't think anybody's going to use it. Guess what is my new favorite feature of Site? I love that thing. It is the best part of our product for me personally. It's always there. It's very unobtrusive. So part of this just comes down to say, if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said, no, kill it dead now. I don't want to have to mess with that. It turns out to be my new favorite thing. So some of this just relies on experimentation. Just because it sounds like a crazy idea doesn't mean sometimes that means you should do it. Yeah.
I'd like for Alex to take this one because Meta obviously has a little bit of data. I imagine it's probably a user problem to figure out what they want to see or what they don't even know what they want to see. So how do you deliver that to them?
That's a good question. I don't know. One of the interesting learnings that I've had along this path is working with our user experience researchers and sitting down and getting a lot of interviews from biomedical researchers at various stages in their career and having them describe to us in their own language what their field of research is. And oftentimes you get these very long, complex, I work at the intersection of this field and this field, or, how is this gene upregulated by blah, blah, blah. And it's a long description. And then the second question or later question that we ask them is, how do you stay up to date in all of the literature in your field? And you can see this huge mismatch between what their field is when they describe it in their own terms and the way that they need to cobble together complex Boolean queries or very broad queries, and they acknowledge I get a whole bunch of irrelevant stuff in my search result, but I don't want to miss anything. And so, part of what we're trying to do is toe that line between, back to your original question around classification. A lot of our users are using PubMed. They're familiar with mesh subject headings, but we're bringing in the publications on a daily basis, a full month to 5 weeks before they ever end up getting mesh subject headings. So we've applied a model, we've trained a model on the existing applied mesh subject headings, and then we auto-classify these things nightly. But those are very broad strokes, very broad categories. So in addition to that, we also go through all of the UMLS ontologies, the gene ontology, various other ontologies, and do named entity recognition into these things. So it allows the researchers who want to refine these feeds in our product to both have broad categorical-based feeds, as well as to start looking at the intersections of science that are very particular to them. I don't think that we've necessarily solved the user interface portion of that. Like how do I go from describing my field in this complex natural language way to actually creating that feed definition for them? And that's an ongoing area of research for us.
Great. I'm going to switch it up. We have a limited amount of time this morning, but I did want to ask one question more to each of our panelists. And just a quick question, a couple word response. So you all are looking at technology daily. You're all technologists at heart. You love playing with technology, except for Neil that didn't get his first computer until he was, did you say 45? No, sorry. He said 25. 25. Yeah, 25. Yeah, there's a great answer behind that one, by the way. So what cool technologies do each one of you see that's on the market that you think will impact our market in some way in the coming years? Just a quick response. I'll just take it straight down the road.
Because I've been working in this space for 10 years, I'm still amazed at knowledge graphs and what they offer in not just information retrieval, but inferencing and question answering and autonomous agents. So I'm a big fan. I think they're not well understood for a relatively simple thing and not as well utilized in this field as they should be.
Steph, you can't answer spreadsheets on this one, so you're going to
Yes.
think of a different technology?
Excuse me. Yeah. So mine is I don't like cryptocurrency and I don't like Bitcoin, but I think blockchain might help with food. And it has this has nothing to do with anything else. But if someone's asking me what I think a cool technology is, I think there are ways of tracking food, information, monies, everything that we could do far more effectively. And we haven't gotten onto that yet. And the ways we're trying to do it are kind of silly right now. And we can probably recognize that through anyone who's lost money on Bitcoin in the last 2 years by trying it in some way. But I think that there's something with regards to tracking and better information around the materials we ingest in our bodies and to our minds. And blockchain strikes me as one of those areas trying to work in that space.
So I guess this is not, it's a relatively new technology, but deep learning, as opposed to more traditional machine learning approaches. I was skeptical about it when I first started working on this project, but I am 100% sold. I spent 6 months working on a very traditional machine learning model, tuning it, and then in half a day was outperformed by a neural net. That was just the end of it for me. So again, not exactly new. It's powering half of our devices in some way, but definitely it's a game changer for us. And also serverless, and just sort of microservices. I think is there's a lot of future there. So.
I think I'm generally very curious about things that are moving value upstream, right? So I think in 2019, end of 2018, right, a lot of publishers started talking about upstream, and of course a lot of the bigger publishers are looking at how do we get in front of our main competitors and establish first contact. So I think there are some technologies that help with that. There are some fascinating new language models that are almost like coming out on an annual basis now. Elmo, GPT-2, BERT, that just allow you to do some, almost like what you were saying, just some remarkable things with much less data, or with the same amount of data with much more precision. And it also goes into like generating text, right? Springer Nature did like the first, software-generated book that passed peer review. There are some fascinating writing tools that are out there, right? Some of them are trying to be more attuned to research, but I think that's an area, right? And then I think just think about how the world and the industry may change the day that people start using software to an ever-increasing degree to generate text. I think it'll have fundamental changes for our industry and the way we review content. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Erwin. So this is the point where the scripted questions go away. Your questions come in, and you can take them any way you like. So let's see. Where's our first question come from? And we may need to use this one microphone to pass around.
It's okay. So if someone has a question, I would just ask that whoever answers it
Okay.
keep the question for our virtual.
Great. Yeah, we can do that. So first question. Don't be shy. Great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. So several of you spoke about entity extraction and entity recognition, and it seems to me there are a large number of individual proprietary databases or collections of those entities that individual entities such as your own use. Does it make sense to have some sort of centralized either open source or standard ontology of known entities? And I know in certain secretive areas those things exist. Does it make sense for the broader industry as a whole?
Yes.
Can you repeat the question, and then is the microphone actually working?
Repeat the question, please.
The question was, does it make sense to have more openly available sets of ontologies to support entity recognition? Yes. I mean, we work very in the biomedical space, and there are very large sets of ontologies, very active ontology developing communities in bio-ontologies right now. But there's also a number of areas like reagents, for example, that are proprietary databases that we could get access to, but they cost money, and I don't think that's not a priority for me right now. So back to the conversation that we were having earlier around openness in general, open source, open access, open development of these algorithms. Yes, I would love to see a lot more of these things shared and openly available for the community to build on top of. So I agree 100%.
On that question.
Wholeheartedly agree. Oh yeah, I agree.
Agree? We're unanimous on
Yes, I agree. It is very difficult within, say, the podcasting industry, though, for an ontology to come about, because it is so fragmented right now, and there is so much competition. And so there have been lots of working groups over the years to get behind closed doors and define things, and they fall apart, and the Slack groups fall apart, because ultimately everything is existing off of RSS and streams. And so it's very hard to collate the information and people decide on basically the entity model across it, even though it kind of exists already and you can see it, the shows, the episodes, and the way that things map to them, and subject matter too. So it's a little more difficult because of the competitive market, but it would be great in a certain industry, and to definitely bring it at podcast specifically into, I guess, the publishing industry would be useful.
Any other questions? Yes, back of the room.
This one's for you guys. So I understand with Meta that you guys are aligned, obviously, with biomedical space, and that fits well into the CCI's mission. Do you see yourselves expanding into other aspects of research beyond biomedical space?
Yes. I mean, my personal answer is yes, but for the foreseeable future, we'll maintain our focus on biomed. My colleague Greg Tannenbaum has probably talked to a lot of people in this room here, and we haven't scoped our conversations with the societies and the publishers specifically around biomedical. So we actually have access to a lot more of the literature right now, but it raises some interesting questions. Both about user experience. Our user experience is driven by what we've been learning from biomedical researchers. So, I can answer the question based on the knowledge graph that we construct, and then the question would be, well, would we then develop a different application, or would that change the application if we were to offer it in computer science, for example, or in education, which is another area that CCI is focused on. But we haven't answered those questions yet, but I certainly could see us doing that in the future.
Okay, I think we're good on time, so thank you very much. We really appreciate it. I'd like to thank each one of our panelists. Everybody flew in today for this, so thank you so much. Have a good rest of your session.